Oh, and now we're going to have policies like we're going to teach books like genderqueer in every kindergarten, and we're going to talk about the importance of abortion in every school even more.
Is it a good idea for everybody to vote? If not, why?
Well, no, it's not a good idea for everybody to vote. I don't believe in this kind of universal enfranchisement of everybody. Um, I believe that we should um, we should enact very rigorous rules when it comes to who gets to vote. I believe you have to be an owner of property. You have to be male. You have to be able to pass a litmus test that examines your um, to what extent you actually understand the Constitution. Because what tends to happen is you get a lot of these politicians, these candidates who are running for office, and they're making all of these promises that aren't even constitutional. But your average American citizen doesn't even know the difference as to whether what they're promising you is actually constitutional or not. And they fall for it. And nobody says anything about it. The media pipes these people up and they win public office. This happens on both the Republican and the Democrat side. And so if we had people who actually took their citizenship seriously, voting, men who are property or owners of property, I think we would be in a much better place as a country. As far as this whole populism thing, that's a word that I hear thrown around a lot by a lot of people. But when I ask for the definition of what the word means, I get mixed answers. So I don't know that there is a collective understanding of exactly what that word means. And, with all due respect to Rob, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is a dialogue. To me, it sounds like what you're saying has a tinge of utilitarianism in it, where I am willing to become liberal or conservative or whatever it is you want to call it. I don't really marry myself to a specific political ideology, so long as I'm meeting the ultimate goal of getting rid of government corruption. And so, for example, in the early 1900s with muckraking journalism, where you had a lot of these journalists who were themselves socialists, and they were writing all of these articles trying to expose the industrialists as greedy capitalists who are exploiting the worker, who are using child labor, and society, specifically the worker, is suffering as a result of this. Well, as it turns out, a lot of these muckraker journalists were lying about the conditions that they were supposedly exposing. And, to the extent that one calls himself a populist for the end goal of getting rid of corruption, where is the line if one isn't, marrying themselves to any kind of fixed moral understanding of how to go about these things? Hopefully that question makes sense.
Yeah, no. First off, you don't have to say with all due respect. No respect due. I don't care whatsoever. But no, I appreciate. So I would say this. Let's say that we would all agree that there is an issue that is the biggest issue in our country. Let's say that we would take something like the sexualization of children in schools, right? And let's say that I have two people running for office in my district for school board. One is someone who's a fiscal conservative, who goes to the same church as me, who is, against gay marriage, who, checks all the boxes for what you would consider averagely a conservative. The other is the exact opposite. They question whether or not we should have guns in the way that we do and, a bunch of other things. However, the one that goes to my church is like, I have no problem with the sexualization of children in school. And the one that's liberal on most of the things would say, actually, I have a huge problem with that. What I'm saying is I'm basically a single issue voter. I take that issue of corruption as first and foremost. I am willing to take allies on positions that I don't agree with normally, like people on the left. So someone like an Aaron Mattei, a Jimmy Dore, a Glenn Greenwald, a Michael Schellenberger, a Matt Taibbi. These are all people that are incredibly on the left, with many of their domestic and foreign policies I would disagree with, but they understand the corruption of institutions like the FBI. What I'm saying is I don't not have a moral underpinning. I have my values, I have my beliefs, I have my philosophical understanding of how I operate, and I don't shift on that. However, when I say I'm a populist first and foremost, I guess that's just my way of saying I'm single issue on wanting this corrupt government to get out. So I would turn the question to you. Would you be willing, let's say that I'm guessing here, and you could let me know if I'm wrong, but if, for example, a return to voting rights, as if you're suggesting, would you be willing to support a candidate who you disagreed with on fiscal policy, who you disagreed with maybe on First Amendment or Second Amendment issues, who was strongly for saying, but only these male landowners should vote? Would you support them over someone who agreed with those other policies more than you, but said, I completely disagree with your way of voting?
The conditions that you lay out or the merits of this proverbial or hypothetical candidate that you lay out isn't enough to satisfy my decision as to whether or not I'll vote for them. It's actually more complex than that. I'll have to do more digging into who they are, into the reason as to why they are making such an effort. But yeah, I mean,
See, for me,
I get your point.
I guess that would be sort of my area of disagreement with you is I could vote for a person of, for example, I would say poor moral character who was agreeing with the issue of me for the wrong reasons, right? Who would do so for self. So in the example I just gave you, let's say that the lefty person that is for those voting things is because he's like, in my community, there's a bunch of Christians that don't own land and I'll get their vote out. So I'm doing it for immoral anti-Christian. I would still support that person, even knowing that that was their reasoning. If I believed that issue was important enough, and I actually believe, dude, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot because
Okay, hold on. Rob, but hold on. But if you said your ultimate goal, even from a utility view, is to get corruption out, are you voting for someone in the short term who gives you an outcome, but in the long term is already set up character-wise to be corrupt?
Well, but it would be the opposite. In the long term, they've set up the system that voting will now ensure that the corrupt get ousted, because now the voting system would be radically changed. Now, it would have to make sense that this, let me put a caveat here. If this person was like,
you're a pragmatist.
Well, right. If this person, if the caveat would be this, if this person would have no chance to get that bill passed, right? It's just a pie in the sky dream. Then no, I wouldn't vote for them because now I'm putting someone in there with views that are antithetical to me. But if I thought this had a chance to be a deciding vote on radically changing the system, so therefore elections going forward would be more favorable to the ideals that I wanted, then yes, I would bite that bullet to have some guy in office for 2 or 4 years that elsewise I disagree with, but has radically changed the system to ensure now, next time the people that vote are going to be people that have more of a concern of constitutionality, and someone like him will be ousted because it's clear that he doesn't have those constitutional views.
Okay, I'm gonna ask Hake to answer this. It's Stanley of $5. Thanks you so much for that super chat. What qualifications does the average moron have, that's me, to make an educated decision on who should run a multi-trillion economy and nuclear military? It's a decent question.
That is a really decent question. I think that's probably goes a little bit to Chad Jackson's point of landowners. When he said property, he means land. He doesn't just mean, oh, I own, this is my property, my cell phone, and I get to vote.
Also, are we talking about loan owners, debt owners?
Good question. Yeah, no, maybe they can't be. I don't know, but when you own property, or when you own a business, say, when you are responsible for different things, you get a little bit more of the world, a real education. When you're working versus when you're just going to school, a working person is going to have a little bit more knowledge of dealing with people in the real world, quote unquote, as opposed to this sheltered, spoiled life of brainwashed liberalism.
Yeah, it sounds like, how Peterson says it, like reality is, in touch with the consequences. It sounds like what you're saying is people who own land or have ownership of things, they have to take care of it. Like, for instance, there are people in our neighborhood who are renters, and the insurance went up for everybody because more people are renting. And the reason is because renters don't take care of property as well as property owners. That's a perfect example. Now, if that's a microcosm for everything else we're talking about, it would be demonstrably true that people having a stake in something, right, their feet in the game, the ability to lose, risk, right, consequence, potentiality of destruction, basically, of their existence. That seems to be something that would be required to vote, right? You have to almost buy into your vote, not monetarily, right? In a sense, it is indirectly monetary, because then this is the problem I have. Okay, Chad, if a rich person, rich leftist, right, tons of money, he starts buying leftist property. I mean, this is a cronyist view. That is, I don't know if it is a full loophole, but it's a partial loophole that still would be a problem. So I'm not saying that because there's one way around it that's ultimately going to destroy it. But that's the kind of thing that gets weird, is that you go, okay, well, can I put my money where I want and buy people houses so they can vote?
No, that's actually a real problem, or real threat. And the thing is, I mean, when it comes to these different ideas, of course, they're not exactly bulletproof. There's always going to be loopholes so long as man is man. But the thing is, what's to stop a conservative billionaire from doing the exact same thing? And so, again, we can talk about all the hypotheticals of the ways in which this system could be compromised or that system could be compromised until we're blue in the face. But the fact is, what the 20th century has shown us is effort from both Republicans and Democrats to enfranchise everybody has not proven to bode well for our country, from a moral perspective, from an economic perspective, like any way you look at it. This whole idea of taking any, Joe Schmo off the street and equipping them with the quote unquote right to vote, I think is a bad idea for a constitutional republic. It just is.
Well, two things real quick to say about this. Maybe something, I don't agree with you on exactly how this would be set, but I agree with your fundamental diagnosis that there has to be stake in the game. There has to be skin in the game. What would you think about this? I've heard people suggest this. How about you have to be a parent to vote? Because parents, like, that are like actual family unit, not like a single dad. I mean, like a parent, that you would then have skin in the game because you care about the future of the country. Whereas many people, even if they're landowners, if they're not parents, we see these diabolical positions that they come up with because they don't really care, because they don't have a future.
Yeah, but Rob, buying a kid is cheaper than buying property.
Oprah would have a lot of votes.
This is true. No. I don't think that should be a qualifier, because we as Americans have proven that simply being a parent doesn't count for anything, because most parents in America have their children in public schools. So that in itself is proof to me that a lot of parents don't know what the hell they're doing. If you are going to trust the government to educate your children, I mean, that is proof to me that you're probably not the best decision maker.
Most property owners probably also send their kids to public schools, so I don't think being a property owner. And I'll say that
this is true. However, to Hake's point, and to Jim Bob's point, that it's something psychological that when you own property, you have a vested interest in seeing to it that you are getting a good return on your investment. So you want to make sure that you're putting people in positions of decision-making and of authority and of political representation who are going to see to it that you're not basically getting a lemon by the time this thing is said and done. I live here in Texas. There's a town called Duncanville where the majority of the people there are renters. Every bond package that the school board proposes passes. And the fact is, this community is completely in shambles. Their schools are doing terrible. The kids aren't passing like basic math and English. However, their football team is killing it. Their football team, I think, is #1 in the state. So they are putting all this money, these taxpayers are, these renters are, into things that aren't important. Whereas in neighboring towns where the majority of the people are actual owners, they actually have a pretty solid education in their respective districts. And so again, it's a difference in terms of what the priorities are based upon people who have stake in the game, or their feet planted in the game, as Jim Bob put it, versus those who don't.
Well, let me just
I mean, part of that is, to that point too, if you own land and you're able to keep it, that's a proving of yourself. You gain some wisdom from that sometimes, at least in a worldly sense. for basic function of life in society, then you have a kid. You're not necessarily raising the kid right, but you're still going to have the kid is still going to be alive, so you don't lose your right to vote. Whereas if you own land, you lose your
right,
land,
if you lost it, right, if you lost, that's true. Yeah, if you lost your land. Right.
It's an interesting, I think maybe the solution would be that there are multiple sets of criteria. So there are options other than just being a landowner. But let me say this. One of the problems with this, again, I agree with the fundamental principle, which is not everyone should vote, right? We should have a system where you have to have some sort of competency or skin in the game to be able to do that. The problem with all the theories that we'd be able to come up with is it's the same problem with term limits. Like when I ran for Congress, like, what do you think the chances are of getting a bunch of Congress people that are reliant on their job for their income to vote themselves out of a job? It's not going to happen. And the same is like the things we're talking about here. But what would you all think to this is a good first starting step? If we agree with the principle that there has to be some minimal amount of effort before someone could vote, here's something that I propose that hopefully we could all agree is a good starting point. How about you have to vote in person on the day of the election? If you don't have enough skin in the game to get your butt up to the polling place and to actually vote that day, your vote should not count, barring some medical ailment or something like we used to. To me, that is the exact principle that you're using here goes along with why mail-in ballots is such a bad idea, because most of these mail-in ballots are being ballot harvest where it's literally like people are going into these places like, hey, here's a bunch of ballots, fill this out really quick, I'll take it and drop it off. It's not even the bare minimal of thought going in to who you're voting for. At least if you set a bar of you actually have to get up and go to the polling place, that takes a lot of those people that have no interest whatsoever that are just submitting ballots because it's too easy out of the game. Would you all be for a starting point of that?
I like the idea. It reminds me of what happened with the 2020 election. We used to have high propensity voters, the people who had the self-discipline on some level to show up and vote. And then in 2020, we had mail-in voting, and you could go to any old precinct at any old time for days and days and days. And we had every idiot voting liberal. So, and it was the most secure in history, by the way.
Of course.
And so, yeah, I agree with that. I think.
I wonder if we would be biased if suddenly, Christians somehow infiltrated and took over all of public education, and we produced more mature, more educated, more based in reality human beings, and suddenly they're 18, and we go, well, actually, I'm kind of okay with 18-year-olds voting now. Like, would we change our mind based on who because currently we go, oh, these kids, they don't know anything. They're leftists. They're totally brainwashed. They're devoid of reality. They have no concept of real world experience. But the age suddenly might not matter if the culture produced a better, more mature, more advanced human being that's 18, right? So, but obviously that's a generational problem that you're going to go, okay, Jim Bob, let's start that. Good luck. See you in 6 generations, right? Or something like this.
Here's
the issue how I see it. Okay. So in the so-called black community, whatever the hell that means, you have these mass get out the vote kind of campaigns that happen every election cycle. And if you turn on urban radio, get your butt to the polls, like
line them up.
You go to church, we need to load up the buses and we need to go to the polls. And so it's like they're practically begging people to go vote. You see the same thing really all over the place. Who's this long-haired dude who is a Republican and is getting
Scott Presler.
People out to, Scott Presler. So he's like a darling of the Republican Party. Look at Scott Presler. Look at all the people he's getting out to vote. And to me, like, seeing this kind of makes my stomach turn. Imagine begging people to care about their own country enough to go vote. Imagine that. So it's like you're practically begging these people to care enough to go vote, as if that's going to change something, as if that's going to do anything. These are people who are not motivated to vote. They're not doing their research. They're not looking at the candidates. They're not looking at the issues. But yet, urban radio is telling them, hey, you need to go vote because this is the most important election of our lifetime. And so by the time this warm body makes it to the poll, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to simply do what they're told as far as who to vote for. in the same way that they did what they're told in terms of getting to the polls. So if you're not motivated out of your own volition to vote, then you probably shouldn't be voting at all.
Yeah, but you can't see
That's how I see it.
You can't see
Yeah, I
that ground
agree.
to the left, though. You can't. So what Scott
It's not
Presler's
about
doing-
left versus right. Like, it's about,
How about
Go ahead.
Christian versus anti-Christian? You can't see that ground to the, secularists, right? Because what happens is if Scott Presler's not playing that game, and if we all decide that we're going to stand on our moral ground and say, listen, we're not going to talk to anyone about voting because if they're too apathetic to actually make a decision on their own and get out there and vote, then we don't want them voting anyways. And all of a sudden we see a blue wave that's like, oh, and now we're going to have policies like we're going to teach books like genderqueer in every kindergarten. And we're going to talk about the importance of abortion in every school even more. And we're going to indoctrinate your children even more. And we're going to take more of your tax dollars. And we're going to, have more foreign conflicts and all this stuff. I don't think that we are able to survive as a society saying that, no, we are so principled. And by the way, this is a problem I think that you see a lot of people they're in Trump's orbit too. They criticize things like mail-in ballots. You won't find a bigger critic of mail-in ballots than me. But as long as the game is rigged like that, you have to play that game. If you stand on principle and say, no, we won't ballot harvest, we're not going to
I
do
disavow.
it, then
It's
you
not
lose.
rigged.
Well, yeah, you want to keep
For
your
the sake of
YouTube
the
channel,
channels.
right? It's most secure ever, right? Like, if you don't play the game, then you lose, and then they make the voting even more ridiculous, and then they'll get out the vote even more. And so, for me, there is a line that needs to be written where you have to stand on principle. What I think Scott Presler does is he tells people that were elsewise apathetic why it's important to go vote. Where I live in rural Pennsylvania, everybody just wants to be left alone. That's all they want. They don't care at all about politics. Till COVID locked them down, till their mothers died in nursing homes and they couldn't see them, till their kids no longer could go out and play with their friends, couldn't go to the park and stuff, and started to have all sorts of developmental disabilities. So if there's a person out there saying like, look, you want to know one of the ways to fight back against this is to get out there and vote for the best possible person. I think that is something that we should be doing.
Well, you make a really good point. So touche. I guess the point that I'm making, yes, admittedly, it is a bit pie in the sky. What I'm saying is, whether it be right or left, this whole idea of getting all these people who wouldn't be voting by their own volition otherwise, but just to get all these warm bodies to the polls, like, I don't think that does any good for society.
Right. You're just saying the general system itself,
Right.
but then Rob's saying the valid point is, well, you can't just leave the void, because we did that with the education system. We said, well, no, don't invade with your ethical system into our public schools. It's secular. Well, secularism is now taking the void.